It's November 15th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with the stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the APEC Summit 2023. President Yoon is off to San Francisco today to attend the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, which could include a possible sit-down with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Yoon is expected to underline the spirit of a stronger solidarity to advance trade and investment liberalization. And ahead of his summit with Xi in the Bay Area, U.S. President Joe Biden says his goal of the meeting Xi is not an attempt to decouple from China, but to pursue better relations. The White House says it has intelligence backing Israel's claim that Hamas has a command center under Al-Shifa hospital. Israeli military forces say it has captured the Hamas parliament and other buildings in the city, and that Hamas has lost control of northern Gaza. World leaders are making their way to San Francisco this week to attend the APEC Summit. Now, that includes President Yoon, who is looking to call for a stronger solidarity and promote trade liberalization. Our Kim Do-yeon starts us off.
Amid crises and challenges, from the conflict between Israel and Hamas and the war in Ukraine to climate change and supply chain disruptions, President Yoon embarks on a mission to boost South Korea's status as a global pivotal state as he heads on Wednesday to San Francisco for the APEC Summit.
저는 세계 GDP의 60% 이상을 차지하는 회원국의 정상들이 한데 모이는 이번 회의에서 공급망 다변화와 무역 투자 확대와 같이 우리 경제에 실질적으로 보탬이 되는 협력 방안을 논의할 것입니다.
As soon as he lands, before he starts his official diplomatic events, he's set to meet over lunch with local Koreans and people of Korean descent, a customary schedule that he has kept for most of his overseas trips. His first event related to the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation is the APEC CEO Summit, a business forum run by the chairing country, the U.S. At that summit, Yoon will give a keynote speech. He then will attend a reception for the leaders and end his first day in San Francisco by meeting young leaders in technology. The official working sessions for APEC will start on Thursday under the theme of creating a resilient and sustainable future for all. Laying out South Korea's role in global cooperation, Yoon will attend the meetings and offer support to countries vulnerable to climate change. He'll also emphasize the need for multilateral efforts to strengthen supply chains and establish digital ethical standards amid the rapid evolution of artificial intelligence. Amid a series of APEC meetings, Yoon's sideline meetings with other leaders are also noteworthy. First, he's set to attend a summit of the U.S.-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, also known as IPEF. He's also set to meet his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida and jointly deliver a speech at Stanford University. With a sideline summit between U.S. President Joe Biden and China's Xi Jinping, there is also a possibility that a sideline meeting between Yoon and Xi could happen. In terms of regional security, President Yoon has said that during the APEC summit, he will bring up the arms exchanges between North Korea and Russia to emphasize what this really means to global security. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And much attention is being drawn to the highly anticipated summit between U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Ahead of the summit, Biden couldn't stress enough how Washington is not looking to decouple from Beijing, but to bring soured relations back on track. An Sung-jin reports.
U.S. President Joe Biden spoke to the press before taking off for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in San Francisco on Wednesday. And in response to the question of what he is hoping to get out of discussions with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, Biden emphasized normalized relations between the two countries.
As I told you, we're not trying to decouple from China. But what we're trying to do is change the relationship for the better.
This comes as U.S. officials work to restore military communication, especially with ongoing issues surrounding the One China principle on Taiwan and U.S. support for the Philippines in the conflict in the South China Sea. However, Biden also warned that despite efforts to stabilize the relationship, the U.S. would not give in to China's zero-sum diplomacy, as seen with past U.S. restrictions on exports of chips to China.
But I'm not going to continue to sustain the support for positions where if we want to invest in China, we have to turn over all our trade secrets.
The meeting in San Francisco will be their first face-to-face in a year. White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby said that as President Biden focuses on current issues, he will be discussing the Israel-Hamas conflict and hoping to persuade Xi to use his influence in Iran to prevent Tehran from stoking tensions in the region further. Russia's invasion of Ukraine as well as economic issues between the two countries will also be high on the agenda. Han Sung-jin, Arirang News.
So, U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping will look to turn back the clock on increasingly complicated U.S.-China relations. Now, will they be a breakthrough, though? Let's connect with the Voice of America correspondent Jessica Stone over in San Francisco. Hello there, Jessica. Great to have you back.
Good to be here.
Jessica, the two leaders are meeting for the first time in almost a year. Now, they have a lot to cover, from talks on Taiwan to escalating tech battles. What's on the agenda at the summit this time?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to point out that they've slated 4 hours of talk time between the two leaders. Last time they met face-to-face in Bali, Indonesia, they spoke for 3 hours face-to-face. And as you mentioned, this is the first time in almost a year that these two leaders of the two largest economies in the world are meeting face-to-face. They will do so about an hour's drive from here in San Francisco. They're going to be taking place their talks at a place called the Filoli Estate. And what's really key about the Filoli Estate is that it is a very beautiful mansion with grounds and lots of orchards and walking trails. And interestingly enough, one of the walking trails has a bridge upon it that crosses the San Andreas Fault. That is the fault that goes between the Pacific tectonic plate and the North American tectonic plate. So you can see some of the symbolism there in the place that they have chosen to do these talks. We may see some iconic photographs of those two leaders that might harken back even to the Obama-Xi Sunnyland Summit, which you remember also took place in California. So these two leaders will have face-to-face meetings. They'll have a working lunch. They'll have a stroll through the grounds. And there'll also be some smaller meetings with some of their officials, including National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. And then, of course, Xi Jinping also has other meetings with the CEO Summit and will make some remarks later Wednesday evening to those CEOs who have gathered at least $40,000, in some cases, the plate, to hear him speak and see what's in it for the business community to invest in China.
Sure, the duration of the summit and the venue, it looks like they are really putting their efforts for the summit to happen. Now, is the U.S. then expecting the summit to be a game changer, maybe? What are Washington's hopes at the moment?
Well, they have really sought to tamp down high expectations. I've been covering U.S.-China relations long enough to remember when we would get large outcomes from these meetings. We're talking about a major outcome that they want to achieve is just simply reopening the communications between the two militaries. That came up in the Chinese spy balloon incident earlier this year, which was ultimately shot down by U.S. forces. But Washington was very concerned that they couldn't get anybody from Beijing on the phone. They want to make sure that there is an opportunity, a line of communication, a hotline, if you will, between the two militaries to de-escalate anything that might happen, not only in the airspace above the United States, but of course in places like the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. So that's an important outcome they're looking for. As your reporter ahead of me mentioned, they're also looking for a deliverable on Iran. They would like the Chinese to use their close relationship with Tehran to get them to stop funding Hamas and to certainly get them to de-escalate any involvement or any potential involvement of Hezbollah out of Lebanon. They don't want to have a second front open up in the Middle East, where they're already assisting the Israelis, of course, in the Gaza Strip. So that's a second major possible outcome that the U.S. is looking for. But again, in terms of trade and investment, in terms of business relations, we don't expect huge deliverables to come out of this summit. It would be sufficient in many people's eyes here in the United States to just get these two countries talking, especially at the leader level, because it's been 12 months, and that's a long time for the two largest economies not to be speaking at the leader level.
Right. Maybe it is time to really normalize our relations. Now, certainly, it's not just President Biden who's been wanting to make Xi-Biden summit happen. Then how are other APEC nations taking advantage of U.S.-China trade tensions?
Oh man, are they really trying to do so, right? Because even though the U.S. has very much expressed its lack of desire to decouple from China, it is clearly sending the signals around the world that it wants to partner more closely with nations that have a friendlier political outlook and a friendlier relation. So we're talking about Mexico and Vietnam are the primary beneficiaries of what's called friendshoring, where the U.S. is not only increased its export controls and its tariffs on Chinese goods, but it's also incentivized U.S. companies to the tune of $500 million in the CHIPS Act for investing overseas in more durable supply chains that leave China out, essentially trying to increase the supply chain for autos going into Mexico and into Canada, and increasing the supply chain for semiconductors in Vietnam. And so they've already seen some incentives announced and some announcements come out of a place called I believe I have the note here, Amcor Technology announcing a plan for semiconductors in Vietnam. And there are other ones as well that are looking to increase their investment in Vietnam.
Sure. Now, we just talked about APEC outcomes. Now, let's talk about potential IPEF announcements. That's the Biden administration's first major trade initiative in the Pacific Economic Framework, and possible political fallout for President Biden.
Yeah, and this reminds me very much of covering the uproar over TPP. If you remember, 2 trade agreements ago, we had the Trans-Pacific Partnership. All of these APEC nations were once again looking to coordinate, not through a framework, but through a free trade agreement and through a free trade zone. That was very much taken down domestically here in the United States. The current U.S. Trade Representative, Catherine Tai, believes that it cost Hillary Clinton the election a couple of presidential elections ago. And the Biden administration, by all accounts, is also feeling similarly pressured by other Democrats. The president's party is essentially saying, if you go forward with the trade pillar of this agreement, we are worried that it's going to cost you the presidential election. So President Biden facing real pressure to basically dump the entire trade pillar of the IPEF. They've already reached a supply chain agreement earlier this year. The other 2 pillars are clean energy, where they could see some outcomes during these sets of talks, and anti-corruption, which is less likely.
Definitely much pressure on his shoulder. All right, Jessica, thanks so much for that coverage, as always.
You bet.
Staying in the U.S., the White House said Tuesday that it has evidence Hamas using Al-Shifa Hospital to operate military actions. Now, the remarks come amid harsh criticism from the international community over fighting close to the crippled hospital where thousands of people are taking refuge. Lee Seung-jae has more.
The White House on Tuesday said it has intelligence indicating that Hamas is using Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza to run its military operations, supporting Israel's initial claims. Speaking to reporters on board Air Force One, White House's national security spokesperson John Kirby said that Hamas has stored weapons at the hospital, adding that using the hospital for military operations is a war crime. Hamas says the claims are untrue. With the surrounding area the scene of intense fighting in the past week, the hospital suffering from energy shortages and dwindling supplies, the Gaza Health Ministry says at least 32 patients, including 3 premature babies, died over the weekend. As the Israeli military continues to seize key Hamas facilities during ground offensives in the Gaza Strip, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant declared that it has completely taken control of northern Gaza. Gallant added that no place will be safe for Hamas until Israel's mission is complete and they bring back all the hostages taken by the Palestinian militant group. Israel also said it had successfully taken over Hamas's parliament building, other government buildings, military and police offices, and intelligence bureau. And as the Israeli forces advance to the center of Gaza City, the IDF says it has found large weapons caches and explosives at many civilian sites, including at mosques and Al-Quds University in Gaza City. Meanwhile, the US and the UK announced a fresh round of sanctions on Tuesday targeting Hamas. The US's third round of sanctions this time targets key Hamas officials. It also targets mechanisms through which Iran provides support for Hamas and its ally Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The UK, on the other hand, sanctioned 4 Hamas senior leaders and 2 financiers, including the militant group's political leader in Gaza and the commander of its military arm. The sanctions aim to cut off funding for Hamas following its deadly attack on Israel last month. 이승재, Arirang News.
Top diplomats of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan have met in San Francisco on the sidelines of the APEC Summit. South Korean Foreign Minister Park Jin sat down for talks on Tuesday local time with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts Antony Blinken and Yoko Kamikawa to address growing concerns on military cooperation between North Korea and Russia, as well as other regional and global issues. They last met on the margins of the UN General Assembly in New York back in September. The U.S. State Department has approved a potential sale to South Korea of advanced SM-6 missiles aimed at intercepting North Korean missile or air threats. According to the Pentagon on Tuesday, the State Department has approved the sale of some $650 million of Standard Missile 6 Block I missiles that were requested by the South Korean government. The SM-6 can directly track targets with its own radar at a maximum range of more than 400 kilometers. It can intercept airplanes, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles. The U.S. also approved the sale of these missiles to Japan last year. Now, the final approval requires a congressional vote. On Tuesday, defense ministers and representatives from South Korea and the UN Command member states convened here in Seoul, vowing a joint response against any attack that challenges the security of the country. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung reports.
South Korea and the UN Command member states have vowed unity against challenges posed on the Korean Peninsula. In a joint statement following the inaugural defense ministerial meeting on Tuesday, defense ministers and representatives declared that they will be united upon any renewal of hostilities or an armed attack on the Korean Peninsula, challenging the principles of the UN and the security of South Korea. The member states reaffirmed that the promise and spirit of the 1953 Armistice Agreement continues to be necessary for the protection of peace and democracy on the Korean Peninsula today, as it was in the past. In a written congratulatory message during the meeting, President Yoon stressed that the UNC is a strong source of power in the defense of South Korea. Meanwhile, Defense Minister Shin Won-sik sent a strong warning to North Korea.
This is a warning to North Korea. Unlike during the Korean War, North Korea is now a member of the UN. Therefore, if it illicitly invades South Korea again, it will be attacking the UNC, a self-contradicting move for a UN member state.
Shin added that Pyongyang's provocations are bound to be followed by strong punishment from the international community centered on the UNC. He also stressed that countries that help North Korea will receive the same punishment. This was echoed by the U.S. Defense Secretary, who expressed deep concerns about the recent growth in military cooperation between North Korea and Russia.
The DPRK is providing lethal aid to Russia to fuel Putin's cruel war of choice against Ukraine. And Russia is providing more support for the DPRK's wide-ranging illicit activities. Now, these activities do not just threaten the ROK, they also erode the rules-based international order that has brought prosperity and peace for the past 70 years.
South Korea on Tuesday hosted the first ever defense ministerial meeting with UNC member states. Defense ministers and representatives of 17 UNC members attended the meeting. The UNC was set up in 1950 to support South Korea against North Korea and now oversees the Korean War armistice. It consists of 17 member states that protected South Korea from armed aggression during the Korean War and fought under one flag to restore international peace. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Kim Ji-young, and we'll now turn over to stories from around the world. To start us off today, U.S. President Joe Biden announced on Tuesday the allocation of $6 billion in new investments from the Inflation Reduction Act to address climate change. Coming in coordination with the release of the 5th National Climate Assessment, or NCA-5, the new investment plan focuses on ways to make the U.S. more resilient to the impact of climate change. These include modernizing the electricity grid to prevent wildfires and withstand extreme conditions, as well as reducing flood risks. While the NCA-5 shows a decline in U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, even with the increase in GDP and population, the Biden administration is also using newly allocated funds for ecosystem conservation and advancing environmental justice through Environmental Protection Agency programs. Now, moving on to a Russian government delegation led by Natural Resources Minister Alexander Kozlov that arrived in North Korea early Tuesday. Kozlov's arrival took place on the same day as the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin met with the UN member states in Seoul. North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency said Wednesday that Russia and North Korea conducted talks on science and technology as well as the economy, while announcing their progress on the regime's ballistic missile program about the new engine that has passed the static tests. Amid concerns over China and Russia potentially supporting the expansion of North Korea's military capacity by assisting North Korea to evade UN sanctions, Kozlov said Russia is willing to develop substantial cooperation with North Korea following September's agreements made in a meeting between Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin. Now, moving over to Mexico, where the country's first openly non-binary magistrate, Jesus Ociel Baena, has been found dead. Baena was confirmed by the state prosecutor's office to have been found dead at home on Monday morning in the central Mexican city of Aguascalientes. They were alongside another person who the local LGBTQ+ rights group has identified as their partner. Baena made history in October 2022 when they were made the magistrate for the Aguascalientes State Electoral Court. As one of the most visible LGBTQ+ figures in the country, publishing on social media photos and videos wearing skirts and heels, Baena was known to have received threats of violence regularly. Mexico Security Secretary Rosa Rodriguez said in a press briefing that it is unclear whether the death was a homicide or an accident. And finally, the Caribbean island of Dominica is creating the world's first marine protected area for the endangered sperm whale. The Dominican government announced on Monday that this will ensure one of the Earth's largest animals will come under protection by law. Around 800 square kilometers of the ocean to the west of the island will serve as a key sanctuary, providing nursing and feeding grounds. Sperm whales are essential to the marine environment as their feces provide nutrients for plankton, which capture carbon dioxide. Prime Minister of Dominica, Roosevelt Skerritt, commented that not only the majestic and highly intelligent animals will be safe, but the reserve will help keep the climate healthy.
Good morning. The thermometer is saying the mercury is a few degrees higher than at the same time yesterday, but I couldn't really tell the difference. But highs will return to the norms this afternoon in most parts. Tomorrow is a Suneung day with the college entrance exam taking place nationwide. It will not be very cold on the way to the exam site, but by the time test takers are heading home, they'll need an umbrella and a thicker jacket. Rain is in the forecast in the west in the morning, spreading nationwide by the afternoon. And do expect to see 5 to 30 millimeters of showers with thunder and lightning at times. Now back to today's forecast. Sunny skies are in the forecast nationwide, with highs going a couple of notches higher than Tuesday. Seoul will be topping out at 12 degrees Celsius, Daegu, Gwangju at 15 degrees. Then brace yourselves for a midwinter chill on Friday. Tomorrow's rain will bring a real chill to the country with a mix of rain and snow expected for most places on Friday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Thursday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's mine? Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
Welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
We're here to make a new type of news. New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are news generation.
Making news just for you. It's November 15th here in Seoul. I'm Yoon, and you're watching News Generation. Joining me in the studio is Nell Song. Good morning. And today we have a new face joining us on News Gen. It's Lee Jung-tae. Welcome, Jung-tae.
Hi, thank you for having me.
All right. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. And the reason why we have Jung-tae joining us in the studio today is for him to represent young North Koreans. So please stay with us to find out more about Jung-tae and what he has to say on today's discussion topic.
North Korea has hit this year's headlines mostly from a security threat angle. Press have poured attention on how the reclusive regime is developing a spy satellite with a bid to make an eye in the sky so that it can better target and attack Seoul's key facilities. But another story worthy of attention is its severe humanitarian crisis. North Korean defectors have told the media about the violent crimes committed by soldiers against civilians due to the country's worsening famine. Pyongyang is experiencing a severe food shortage after being hit with one of the worst famines since the regime was founded in 1948. The North's COVID-19 restrictions have exacerbated the crisis.
Just how severe is North Korea's humanitarian crisis? Defectors have often called for the international community to intervene and tackle this urgent issue, and that's why we also brought Jung-tae, who defected from North Korea to South Korea in 2007. And Jung-tae, once again, it's a pleasure having you here in the studio with us, and it'd be great if you could tell us more about yourself and when and how you exactly decided to come to South Korea.
Yeah, like I said, I am Jung-tae, and I am from North Korea. I came to South Korea in 2007. And I left North Korea in 2006. And you know, a lot of people in South Korea asked me like, how did you come to South Korea or why? And now I can say I may answer like, I came to South Korea for freedom. But back in 2006, when I crossed the border, actually I was just hungry, you know, to leave the regime. Because there are not many reasons, but tried to escape from hunger. I thought like I should leave North Korea because if I go to China, I thought at least I don't have to worry about food. Yeah.
I see. And do you mind if I ask you, how did you decide to, what was your route of defecting? And did you come with your family? Did you come alone? How old were you?
That's right. So I am 32. So I was born in 1992. And I came to South Korea with my mom and my sister. Yeah. So actually my family are here.
So you were only like 15, 16 at the time when you decided to cross from North Korea to China. And the answer that really resonated with me was the fact that you were so hungry.
That's right, yeah. There was a simple reason as well as the main reason.
Yeah, it is a main reason. And sadly, we're still seeing so many North Korean residents go through this food shortage problem. Now, since arriving in Seoul, you said that now if you reflect back on your journey, you came here for freedom. So tell us about the new chapter in life here in South Korea.
At the end of last year, I worked as a radio producer for NGO. So I used to make news content for North Korean human rights. Yeah. And then nowadays, since this year, I have been working as a freelance broadcaster. So, you know, this is how I appear on News Generation, which is a great honor. And I also have been appearing on Korea now. Yeah. So since 2021.
I see. So you've actively been on broadcast channels to talk about your experience. And I think you're a perfect match for today's discussion topic.
Thank you.
Because we're going to be talking about North Korean humanitarian crisis and the human rights violations that the international community often talks about. And we've recently heard a lot of horror stories about some defectors that were sent back forcibly from China to North Korea. So now, why don't you recap us on the latest reports of China's forced repatriation of North Korean refugees?
Right. I believe that we actually mentioned this on the show about North Korean defectors who were repatriated after the Asian Games. Back then they mentioned that the Ministry of Unification confirmed the number, but the identities of the people were unknown. But the repatriation was indeed true, and there was an activist group which claimed that it was around 600 people, but turns out there's actually about 1,000 more of them remaining in China, kept imprisoned, and there are concerns for those people to be sent back as well. And even the ministry in South Korea is requesting cooperation with the local ministry. And Tae Young-ho, a politician, a diplomat from North Korea here in South Korea right now, spoke up about this issue in the United States, asking for people to stop this repatriation.
Right.
And even under the UN Refugee Convention, it states that countries should not deport or repatriate people who's into lands where there are threats upon their freedom or upon their life. And while North Korean defectors, they do fit under this criteria, they are still being repatriated due to diplomatic issues, and there needs to be an active voice to stop this from happening.
And it mainly has to do with China being North Korea's key ally. That's why they've never recognized North Korean defectors as refugees, and what would violate what other UN member states, as you mentioned, Niall, would consider a basic international principle, and we call that non-refoulement. And this is when countries don't force refugees back to their home when they face the risk of persecution. And speaking of persecution, it's widely known that Pyongyang cruelly punishes citizens who've been repatriated from abroad. And Jung-chul, I think you could give us a really good insight into this matter. How concerned are you for the lives of these hundreds of defectors that were sent back to North Korea forcibly? What type of future awaits them?
Actually, it depends on what kind of crime the repatriated North Koreans committed in China, I think. And indeed, you know, 600 North Koreans repatriating at once is kind of unprecedented. So that's why a lot of North Koreans here in South Korea, they are really shocked, because it is unusual. And I think you know, like my mom, she used to do a smuggling when she was in North Korea. She went to China so many times to sell something to make money. And if you get caught by Chinese police by doing smuggling in China, I think that is kind of okay, still illegal, because you can get out of the prison by bribing after 3 months. But if you get caught by Chinese police in China during the journey to come to South Korea, it is a huge crime to North Korean regime. So that's why it depends on people. So I think what we can say for sure is that the repatriated North Koreans, they will face severe punishment, I think.
The minimum being maybe they would be sent to prison camps?
I think so, yeah.
Prison camps, and in the worst case scenario, would they even might face a death penalty?
Actually, that is something happening in North Korea, right? As we know. So sometimes depends on the degree to the crime. Some people, they are executed in public. So that kind of thing is happening still happening in North Korea.
And these are major violations of human rights. And I think now we're seeing more of that because since March, for the first time ever, Seoul's Unification Ministry decided to release a report, a public report that is, that lists all of the human rights abuses by the North, such as its public executions and torture. And this report is around 450 pages long. It was written based on around 1,600 cases of human rights violations testified by over 500 North Korean defectors between the years 2017 and 2022. And Chongchul, did you read this report yourself?
Sure. So actually, you can download it from the Ministry Unification homepage, and in English as well as in Korean. And I saw a lot of human rights violation cases, you know. And I think a lot of people in the world, they already know what is happening in North Korea because, you know, the international community has been paying attention to North Korea. Yeah. And one thing I was surprised was that, like we said, some people are tortured in North Korea, and some people, they are working as a forced labor in a prison camp. And even, you know, some people, they get punished by watching some foreign movies. Yeah.
Just a movie?
Yeah, because, you know, when I was in North Korea, I also watched foreign movies, but I should hide, yeah. Yeah, because, you know, if I get caught by watching the foreign movies, I will get fined, or I even face some severe punishment. Yeah.
And now I can completely understand why you said your journey to South Korea, the revelation it was an escape for freedom. Because that's just, you're getting ripped of your basic freedom to even watch content, right?
That's right, yeah.
Now, here in the studio, now, what did you think about this report? Did you ever see what the Unification Ministry released?
Right, so I read articles of this and what they released, and I heard that this is written in all accounts of eyewitnesses, but I just can't imagine 450 pages. That's quite long, filled with just horror and 1,600 different ways that these human rights are just being violated. And it shocks me to think that a country, a nation is still standing on these values, and people are being taken away their dignity on a daily basis for choosing things that every human is allowed to choose to do. And I just believe that that's just quite tragic.
And I think a lot of attention is now on the fact that since the regime has opened up its borders to foreigners, and we've seen North Korean defectors forcibly repatriated back to this reclusive regime, a lot of people are saying that the human rights violations could have gone worse. So could you tell us about the latest on that front?
Yeah, that's right. So it's not unclear, you can say, like the repatriation happened because of the North Korean regime reopened its border. But I think it is right. First, it is true because after 3 years, COVID-19 pandemic, North Korea reopened its border, and 600 North Koreans, they are repatriated. But the thing is that, on the other hand, because of the reopened the border, a lot of North Koreans coming to South Korea, the number is actually increasing. Yeah. So I think opening the border again has some two effects. Yeah.
Two side effects, as in we may be seeing more people take refuge here to South Korea.
That's right. Yeah.
Though it's a very dangerous and life-risking journey. But at the same time, we might see a lot of more forced repatriation, which goes against the UN's main and basic principle of human rights. And also at the same time, I think reopening borders might give more North Koreans access to South Korean content, which you mentioned before, Chongchul. If they do see it, it can cause a lot of penalties, right?
Of course, you know, reopening the border again means people who are living near the border, like between China, you know, Amrok River, Tuman River, they can actually restart smuggling again, yeah. So which means people go to China, and when they bring something like food as well as Chinese movies or South Korean drama, which it means the information can go to North Korea again. Yeah.
And that can.
And then some people, if they get caught by doing that kind of business, I mean smuggling, of course, people get punished.
Yeah, and that exacerbates the humanitarian crisis we're seeing. And we've mentioned a few times on News Gen on how much our generation seems to prioritize human rights. Then how attentive are we when it comes towards North Korea's humanitarian crisis? And now, have there been any efforts to try to tackle this issue?
Unfortunately, as we've mentioned on the show before, the younger generation of Koreans seem to be a little less emotionally attached to the idea of North Korea itself. According to a survey of 1,000 Koreans from ages 18 to 39, only 17% of them associated North Korea as the same ethnic Korean as us, which would naturally lead to them being a little less interested in the human rights issue. I do feel like the human rights interests are more angled towards LGBTQ rights and gender equality, sometimes immigrants, and a little more local issues. And yeah, I think we just feel a little bit separated from that.
We do. And that's the sad reality, I think. And now that we're seeing so many headlines on the North's provocations, and it's just an abundant amount of news that we see, so much that we become a little bit immune to it. But I think today's discussion could facilitate better discussions and perspectives as to really understanding that there's humans involved with it. And now I'd like to ask whether our global viewers could relate. Though North Korea may seem to be a distant country to them, I wanted to ask if they were quite keen on the fact that North Korea is going through a human rights violation crisis. So take a look at the screen to find out what 3 of our viewers had to say. Terrace Bell said, as Americans learn more about South Korea, North Korea often comes next. Most people know about the human rights crisis in North Korea, but only to a certain extent. Eric Lee said, my parents were born in Pyongyang and saw with their own eyes as their once beautiful free society was being transformed into a dystopic nightmare. Any critical speech about the Kim regime was a guarantee that you would disappear overnight. Hannah Hirano said, Japan is at the forefront of international efforts to hold North Korea accountable for its human rights violations. But many young Japanese people are still in the dark about how bad things are. This lack of awareness is partly down to North Korea's closed-off society, that is, and the limited information available about its human rights abuses. Exactly, and I think these are all understandable given that North Korea is a reclusive regime. We don't really have much information. They're not pretty vocal on the international society about their human rights issues. But I do think because our generation, specifically those in their 20s and 30s, are quite keen about human rights, we need to be talking about it. So would you like to elaborate on why our generation needs to be concerned about the livelihoods of North Koreans?
Right. I mean, this is my personal opinion, but every country has an association with its neighboring country, how they interacted throughout history, and some have great relationships, excellent relationships, overcoming their differences, whether it be in culture, language, ethnic background, and maybe even political background. And I feel like we share so much more common ground culturally, linguistically, ethnically than any other neighboring countries in the world. We used to be one country, and we have the potential to be great partners. And in any case, even if we do share common grounds or not, human rights violations should never be tolerated under any circumstances. So yes, this is definitely something, as neighbors, we should really look into, study up on, and really care about.
Exactly. And Chongcher, you're speaking on behalf of our generation, but specifically among North Korean residents and those in their 20s and 30s. So why should our generation be concerned about their livelihoods?
Actually, I think all people should be concerned about human rights issues. And I think North Korean human rights issues are no exception, So around me in South Korea, which is grateful is that a lot of people, they are actually paying attention to North Korean human rights. And as you know, people in North Korea, they are still suffering from hunger and human rights violations. So it's been almost for 7 decades, and which is not a short period, right? So I think this is kind of a tragedy. So this reality in North Korea still bothers us. I mean, bothers the world. I think it is natural for us to pay attention to North Korean human rights.
Exactly. And our discussion does come at a time when geopolitics are very flared. We're seeing a lot of tensions, especially here in the Korean Peninsula. Just in the morning today, we heard about the IRBM test that North Korea is pulling off. We're also seeing defense ministers from South Korea and the U.S. also talk about how big of a security threat North Korea is posing. But I think
think the message today is that we need to sometimes divide politics, diplomacy from the human rights, because humans, like the residents there, they have nothing to do with what the regime is politically deciding to orchestrate. And also, our discussion comes at a day when a North Korean human rights museum will be open, right now?
Right, so the NKDB, North Korea Database Center, was founded back in 2003, and it was to record, analyze, and store data on the North Korean human rights status. This organization is now celebrating its 20 years anniversary and has opened a museum. You can go, experience, and learn about North Korea, the human rights issues there. I would absolutely love to visit, but I do feel like it will be a little bit emotional and devastating to kind of face the truth that perhaps we have been avoiding for a long time because of our daily conveniences.
And I completely agree. I think museums like this should be more open, and reports like the Unification Ministry has released back in March should be revealed to the public, because we need to raise awareness on what's actually happening. And that's why, before we end off, I'd like to ask, is there any message or last words you guys would like to deliver to our viewers to remember today?
Yes, I mean, honestly, it's such a great honor to have Chol on the show today, because oftentimes I feel like when we read the news, when we study things with text, we just kind of see it in a factual way, in a historical way. But when people like Chol come on the show, when you have the privilege to interact with people like that, it becomes very real, very emotional, and you understand that, you know, Chol and I are the same. We are the same, and he just has this experience from North Korea, which nobody should be having, really. And I think really just connecting on an emotional level, not just, you know, watching it through something, but experiencing it, whether it through museums or talking with people. I think that's so important.
Exactly. Reading through these news headlines and realizing that there's a human behind it.
Absolutely.
And that human being you, Chol. So any last words you'd like to give?
That's right. So it's an honor for me as well. Recording North Korean human rights cases is really important, because it can give a signal to the perpetrators in North Korea who are assaulting normal North Koreans, which can say like, if you guys keep torturing or keep harassing people, maybe you guys will face severe punishment in the future. That's why I think the report is kind of important. But the more important thing is that I think we should think about as well, what can we do to change the life of North Koreans?
Instead of just talking about it, though, we hope to see some actions.
Absolutely.
Exactly, and hopefully we will see that as President Yoon is in the APEC Summit, and we are seeing the international community prioritizing this issue. And hopefully here on News Generation, as much as we harmonize between North and South, we will facilitate better discussions on how to really bring on that action. Until then, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Nell Song, my pleasure, and Lee Jung-cheol.
Great to be here again.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are News Generation.
Welcome